With the most recent release of FNaF Into the Pit, I found it kinda difficult to make a theory about the game as it seems much more suitable for a theory discussion. It doesn't really hammer home any given point, only really having a bunch of references to different areas of the series, and so a lot of small pieces of evidence for theories. But since it's a new FNaF game, we got a new FNaF game protagonist. So what I thought it would be cool to do is make a theory talking about the identities of every FNaF protagonist. Obviously some of these are much easier to solve than others, especially Into the Pit itself, since we're just given the identity, but some games like FNaF 2, 3, and 4 have much more debate surrounding their protagonists, so in this video we'll be going over the protagonists of each FNaF game, excluding stuff like the spin-offs and the fanverse games, though I will talk about FNaF World. I won't go completely in order because some things are easier to explain out of order, but only really like once or twice. So, without further ado, let's get started. In the very first Five Nights at Freddy's game, our paycheck says that our name is Mike Schmidt. Knowing that there's another character named Mike in the series creates an instant connection between Mike Schmidt and Michael Afton. In the FNaF movie, Mike Schmidt is the protagonist, the guard at Freddy's like he is in FNaF 1. However, it's unclear whether or not Mike actually is the long-lost son of William Afton. Regardless, Mike's family does align perfectly with the family of Michael Afton in the games. The Afton mother is indicated to die in the games, and Mike's mom dies in the movies. Michael Afton also has a younger sister who becomes Circus Baby, and Mike in the movie has a younger sister who almost gets spring-locked inside an Ella costume, and Ella in the books is actually an early Charlie Bot, and the latest Charlie Bot turned out to be Circus Baby. And finally, Mike has a younger brother who dies, and because he was the one who was supposed to keep him safe, he feels like his brother's death is his fault. And the same happens with Michael in the games. Whether Mike in the movie is an Afton or not, he very clearly seems to be the Michael Afton equivalent, indicating Mike Schmidt and Michael Afton are the same person in the games. Something else worth noting is that the survival logbook is owned by someone named Mike. Throughout the book, Mike makes constant references to FNaF 1, but he also references Sister Location, which indicates the protagonist of FNaF 1 is the same person we play as in Sister Location, which was actually the introduction of the concept of Michael Afton. Hand Unit has the name Mike taped onto it, and at the end of the game, the player says his name is Michael, and called William Afton his father, making the player of Sister Location Michael Afton. And if we play as Michael Afton in Sister Location, then the logbook indicates that we also play as him in FNaF 1. But what's most interesting about Mike are the reasons he gets fired as well as his last name. See, in FNaF 2, there's two protagonists, Jeremy Fitzgerald and Fritz Smith. Jeremy may or may not be someone specific, like one of the FNaF 4 bullies, but to the story of FNaF 2 itself, it doesn't really make that much of a difference. However, I want to focus on Fritz. On Night 7, Fritz gets fired for the exact same reasons that Mike does in FNaF 1, tampering with the animatronics and odor. What's more is that the names Smith and Schmidt, the last names of Fritz and Mike, are the same name. Schmidt is actually the German equivalent of the English name Smith. This implies that Mike Schmidt and Fritz Smith actually are the same person, someone who has a reason to keep coming back to Freddy's, and if Mike Schmidt is Michael Afton, Fritz Smith is as well. What's more though, is the story What We Found. Hudson in the story has a mother who dies and a stepfather who is just the worst person ever, which aside from the stepfather part, matches with Michael Afton pretty well. When Springtrap appears in Fazbear's Fright, the horror attraction, where Hudson is the security guard, he ends up getting agony-induced hallucinations, ones pertaining to his past. In FNaF 3, the protagonist also gets agony-induced hallucinations in the form of the Phantom animatronics. By the logic What We Found provides, those phantoms are likely part of the protagonist's past. Since the phantoms are hallucinations of animatronics from FNaF 1 and 2, the player of FNaF 3 has to be the same person we play as in FNaF 1 and 2. If the protagonist is so persistent over the course of 30 years, they have to have a connection to Freddy's, and disregarding how we've already established the player of the first two games to be Mike Afton, it being the same person indicates an immense amount of persistence which matches with Michael Afton. And like I said, if we play as Mike in the first two games, that means we also play as him in the third too. But it doesn't end there. We play as Michael again in FNaF 4. The Bite Victim was believed to be the protagonist of FNaF 4 for the longest time, and even still, so many people believe that to be the case, mostly because we play as him in the minigames, and because of the game claiming we play as a child. Plus, there's also the Easter eggs of flowers, pills, and an IV drip. However, this doesn't make sense. First of all, throughout all of FNAF, the 8-bit minigames have always been things that happened prior to the events of the actual game. If the bite victim was one of the experiment victims prior to the minigames, that wouldn't work, because the minigames wouldn't be in the past, they would be in the future. It also wouldn't add up because the flowers, pills, and IV drip wouldn't have anything to do with the bite victim if the bite hadn't already happened. The nightmares also couldn't be in the bite victim's coma, because he is only in that coma for 1 day, not spanning 7 or even 8. Plus, the nightmares keep going even after the bite victim dies. Theoretically, he could still be able to dream as a spirit. He is asked in the logbook if he has dreams, which indicates he did go through the nightmares at some point, and the question is present tense, so maybe he still is. However, that's not very satisfying, because on that very page, there is a drawing of Nightmare Fredbear, but it is drawn by Mike, meaning Michael Afton also went through the nightmares. But how do we know he's the actual protagonist? Well, it's something we hear in FNAF 4 itself. It's a distorted and reversed version of the FNAF 1 Night 1 phone call. Back in the days of FNAF 4, Scott made a post talking about how people hadn't solved the story of FNAF 4. He claimed that people probably assumed he filled the game with random Easter eggs, but that he hadn't. The Easter eggs and tidbits you can find throughout the game actually mean stuff. What that means is that the FNAF 1 phone call in the nightmares is actually there. The player is actually hearing it. That means the nightmares happen after the events of FNAF 1, and that the player of FNAF 1 and FNAF 4 is the same person. If Mike Schmidt was a random person, there's no reason he would be the player of FNAF 4. Regardless, as we've already established, Mike Schmidt is Michael Afton, and therefore the player of FNAF 4 is too. And if you think about it, the flowers, pills, and IV drip make a lot of sense if the player is Michael, as it would be him going through the nightmares because of what he did to his brother, and it would make sense if the bite victim was actually inflicting the nightmares onto Michael. That's why we're supposedly playing as a child, because Michael is going through the experiments that the bite victim already went through. Moving on now, we're finally at a game where we don't play as Michael Afton, though it will be short-lived. FNAF World. While FNAF World doesn't seem to be literal, it is still a very important game in the series, and it is a representation of actual canon events, namely the creation of the Happiest Day minigame from FNAF 3. FNAF World is all about the puppet enlisting the help of Adventure Freddy, our protagonist, to set up the pieces of the Happiest Day minigame for the bite victim to eventually put together. The puppet, who in the game takes the form of the Glitch Bear, tells us that we were created specifically for the purpose of setting up Happiest Day. There's two ideas I can see for this. In the 7th Fazbear Frights epilogue, Larson hears whispers coming from the evidence bag from the FNAF 6 fire, and inside this bag is the puppet. In the FNAF AR Remnant segments, whisper sounds are emitted from the Dark Remnant, which summons Shadow Bonnie. The puppet and Shadow Bonnie both emit whisper sounds. Now, this isn't damning evidence on its own. There's no doubt in my mind that other spirits and paranormal entities in FNAF can whisper, but it's not this alone that makes me think these two have a connection. There's also the fact that Shadow Bonnie and Shadow Freddy both first appear in FNAF 2, the first game the puppet appears in. Shadow Freddy is established to be an entity made from Afton's evil, so it would make sense if he was made from Afton's fury in killing Charlotte. Meanwhile, Shadow Bonnie is one of the characters we see in FNAF 3 setting up the Happiest Day minigame. While yes, there's other animatronics doing that, and it's not literally those characters doing it, Shadow Bonnie cycles through the levels, and most importantly, through the glitches, as if he's in control here, and in FNAF World, we, as Adventure Freddy, travel through the glitches in order to set up Happiest Day. It would make sense if maybe Shadow Bonnie was created by Charlotte's agony in her death, and he was specifically used to help set up Happiest Day. While not specifically created for that purpose as the line from FNAF World would suggest, it would provide some explanation for that line that makes sense if FNAF World isn't actually literal. Also, while not the most damning piece of evidence by any means, it's worth noting that Shadow Bonnie in FNAF 3 is named RWQFSFASXC, and that was specifically for that version of Shadow Bonnie, not the version we see in FNAF 2, the version in the minigames that sets up Happiest Day. Then in FNAF World, Shadow Bonnie is named RWQFSFASXC again, or RXQ, and one of his moves in the game is gift boxes, and the puppet in FNAF 2 gives gifts to the missing kids before giving them life, which is also what the gift boxes do in FNAF World, give you a second life. Again, not the best evidence, but still worth noting. So, do we play as Shadow Bonnie in FNAF World? It would definitely make sense, and I could definitely see it. But what would be weird about that is how one of the clock minigames in FNAF World is us putting Shadow Bonnie in place for his minigame from FNAF 3, which doesn't make much sense if we ourselves are Shadow Bonnie. Alternatively, that line I mentioned earlier about us being created specifically for setting up Happiest Day might be exclusively for the game, and instead we could be playing as an actual spirit. While Adventure Freddy is the protagonist of this game, it isn't literal, so instead, I think the player might actually be Cassidy. Why? In the final cutscene of Ultimate Custom Night, we see Golden Freddy, Cassidy, fading away into the darkness. This, along with the Old Man Consequences minigame, caused a lot of people to assume that Cassidy is the one you should not have killed in Ultimate Custom Night. I won't go in depth into why I don't think that is the case in this video, because I plan on doing a video in the future all about Andrew where I will discuss that topic. However, that Old Man Consequences minigame bear is Golden Freddy, Cassidy, regardless. Going back to FNaF World, we have the same minigame, same setting, same characters, same pond. You can still talk to Old Man Consequences and you can still go into the pond. All that's different is what happens when you go into the pond and the dialogue from Old Man Consequences. But if everything else is the same, it would make sense if that bear was the same person in both minigames. If that bear is Cassidy in Ultimate Custom Night, that bear is likely also Cassidy in FNaF World. That indicates that we play as Cassidy in the rest of FNaF World. The idea here is basically that after Afton kills the missing kids, they possess the animatronics, and something happens to the bite victim's soul, so the puppet wants to make sure that he doesn't possess an animatronic too, so she'll put him back together. And so she enlists the help of Cassidy to help set up Happiest Day to set the bite victim free. Personally, I don't know which of these options works better, because there's a lot that adds up with both, but a couple things that make me skeptical of both as well. In reality, we might not be playing as anyone in particular, but I think if we play as Shadow Bonnie or Cassidy, it can very well make sense. But I'll leave it up to you guys to decide which one makes the most sense to you, because I'm not really sure. And it's also possible, like I said, that we don't play as anyone, and that's also a valid option. Since we've already covered Sister Location, the next game to talk about is Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator, aka FNaF 6. And once again, we play as Michael Afton. The main reason this is so easy to figure out is just the nature of FNaF 6 as a game. It's the grand finale of the series, and so it is all about getting rid of everything that is left. Since Michael is still alive, he has to be a part of this. In Henry's speech, he claims that our protagonist is not who this job was for, but that we probably wanted to be here. If we were just a random person, there is absolutely no reason we would want to die in this fire, so us playing as Michael is undeniable. The player of Ultimate Custom Night is also pretty easy to figure out. We're constantly told by characters like Jacko Chica and Nightmare Yawn that we are living in a nightmare and burning forever, which aligns with what Henry tells William Afton at the end of FNaF 6. The game is someone being tortured by the one you should not have killed, which is a very interesting name to give, because it implies that our character has killed more than one person, but that this specific spirit is special, which rules out Mike being the protagonist as he only killed one person. In the Fazbear Frights books, it is basically confirmed that the player of Ultimate Custom Night is in fact William Afton, as the man in room 1280, Andrew's killer, is a burned man, matching what happens to Afton in FNaF 6, although that also matches Michael. But in the story, they're tortured in nightmares before attaching to Andrew and being officially revealed to be William Afton himself in the 7th epilogue. The man in room 1280 story is essentially Ultimate Custom Night, but from the perspective of the outside world, meaning Afton is in fact the player of that game. Moving on now, let's discuss FNaF VR Help Wanted. There's two options for this one, though I think one is stronger than the other. In the Curse of Dreadbear Corn Maze minigame, we can make it to the cellar and find the Vanny mask. With FNaF AR and Security Breach, we know for a fact that Vanessa was a beta tester for Help Wanted and that she gets possessed by Glitchtrap. When we put on the Vanny mask and hold the Glitchtrap plushie, we can hear Vanny talking to Glitchtrap, indicating that we play as her. Simple, right? Well, it's not actually as simple as that. See, a case could be made that we actually play as Gregory. Now hear me out. It's really weird that when we hear the conversation with Glitchtrap, we only hear one side. If we were Vanny, why would we not hear Glitchtrap if she can hear him? It's almost like it's just a recording that the mask triggered. One thing a lot of people noted when they first played FNaF VR is that the player is actually really short, as if they are a kid. In the Fright story In the Flesh, a FNaF VR game is being developed and tested, and there is a malicious code in the game that is acting like William Afton, just like in FNaF VR. There's a really random scene in the story though, where a random hacker actually hacks into the game's systems to play the game early, the currently corrupted version of the game. Through the Patient 46 tapes as well as GGY, we learn that Gregory is a hacker and is also possessed by Glitchtrap. So, it's entirely possible that Gregory actually hacked into the Fazbear systems to play the Freddy Fazbear virtual experience early and ended up getting corrupted by Glitchtrap, meaning we play as him in FNaF VR after Vanessa has already been corrupted, and when we find the Vanny mask, we just hear what Vanessa's conversation with Glitchtrap was like, but only Vanessa's side. That seems like a very likely option for how Gregory got infected with Glitchtrap, but it could also have just happened off screen. Us being short in FNaF VR is likely just a feature to make us more vulnerable. I mean, that's literally the entire point of the hard mode plush trap minigame, where we're made even smaller. But I think the most damning piece of evidence that we play as Vanessa relates to the mask. When we play Corn Maze and put on the mask, we hear heavy breathing. But then once the mask is on, the breathing starts to slow down. We are calming down. With this mask on, our character feels safe, and that very heavily indicates that the mask belongs to us. Playing as Gregory is a cool idea, and I think it is possible, but I don't think it's necessary, and I don't think it's the most likely option. Instead, I think we simply play as Vanessa. Next up, FNaF AR. I think this one is pretty cut and dry. We don't really play as anyone, we're just a random person. Now, older FNaF AR file messages indicate that maybe we could have originally played as Edwin in FNaF AR, but if that was ever the case, it definitely isn't now. With the storyteller, we see Edwin's full story from before he even found out the Mimic was at play. In those file messages, the player seems to already know what the Mimic is, but in the storyteller there's never any indication of the Fazbear Funtime service existing yet, let alone Edwin getting it, and he dies at the end of the story before he gets the chance to, so we definitely don't play as Edwin. Tales was apparently written in like 2019, which is the year FNaF AR came out, so it wouldn't surprise me if some plans just got slightly altered. Now, it is possible that we do play as someone specific because the Fazbear Funtime service is meant to last 24 hours, and ours glitches out and lasts 999 years. I think that's just for gameplay purposes, so we as people in real life don't think we can play the game for only a day, and I do doubt that we are a specific person, but maybe we're someone. Maybe we're Michael Afton if he's alive, maybe we're Vanessa, maybe we're Gregory or Cassie's dad, maybe we're a robot. Would explain how our vision glitches, but Gregory's does too. And is he a robot? Yeah, don't answer that. There's nothing to talk about with Security Breach and Ruin. We simply play as Gregory and Cassie respectively. There's no reason to talk evidence proving that when it's blatantly stated numerous times, so let's move on and talk about Help Wanted 2. In Help Wanted 2, we play as an adult who is working to try to get a job at the Pizzaplex as pretty much the only human employee left. At the end of every round of Phaser Blast, Carney claims that this game is fun for the whole family and that we look like we have children, which heavily implies that the character we play as is a parent. At the end of the game, when playing Princess Quest 4, we swap characters, no longer playing as the princess and instead switching to playing as our protagonist from the rest of the game. There's a set of 6 graves with torches that we have to light up, and if we light them in a very specific order of Chica, Foxy, Freddy, Bonnie, Golden Freddy the Puppet, an area in the ground opens up, revealing a chest, and inside this chest is a Bonnie mask. When we collect it, we get an achievement called Lost Luggage, and the player remarks that the Bonnie mask looks familiar. The Ruin DLC went out of its way to talk about Cassie's dad, and how he has a Faz Wrench, and how his favorite character was Bonnie, and that he used to collect Freddy and Friends lunchboxes. He was mentioned enough times that it was definitely notable and interesting. Since his favorite character is Bonnie, is it a coincidence that the Bonnie mask looks familiar to him? We know Cassie's dad worked at the Pizzaplex and used a Faz Wrench just like our player character in Help Wanted 2. In the game, we use the Faz Wrench to actually unlock Princess Quest 4, which is where we find the Bonnie mask in the first place. Our character seeming to have kids also adds up, as of course he has Cassie. Also, the fact that specifically a Bonnie mask is familiar to us could indicate that Cassie's dad is the Bonnie bully from FNaF 4, who also wore a Bonnie mask. That would also explain what is special about Cassie's dad. He was the Bonnie bully. He was partially responsible for the bite of 83. He was there from the very beginning. And finally, that brings us to Into the Pit. And of course, we know that we play as Oswald, and those are the protagonists of all the FNaF games. I'm not quite sure where we're going to be going with Secret of the Mimic, whether it'll be Edwin somehow, or someone else we know, or someone brand new, but I guess we'll find out next year. Also, I do apologize for being late on my week before video. I've just gotten really distracted away from reading the book, so it's taken longer for me to make that video than I thought. I've been working on this video in the background and happened to finish it first and decided to release it so I can have a video out. Who knows if my next theory will be out before my week before video, but we'll have to see. Until then, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you want to, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye guys!